Welcome back to Grade 8 History, Unit Number 1, Creating Canada, 1850 to 1890. This is Lesson Number 5, What Were the Challenges of Confederation? And I just want to draw your attention to this political cartoon here. I've seen other political cartoons from the time that are similar to this one in that this shows a group of politicians pondering over the question of Canadian Confederation. How will they take the colonies and put them all together and make a new country? And in a number of the political cartoons, this one included, the idea of the Canadian Confederation or Canada is represented or symbolized by a child who often raises the concern or the consternation of the adults seen in the cartoon. But let's proceed. Before we begin today's lesson, let's take some time to review the reasons why leaders of the colonies of British North America wanted the colonies to be joined together. Now, we'll talk about this, of course, at the start of tomorrow's class, but what I want you to do is to put the video on pause so that you can write down the reasons that you can remember as to why leaders of the colonies of British North America wanted to join the colonies together. Put the video on pause now. All right, and let's begin. As we learned in previous lessons, all of the British North American colonies were facing serious problems, both from the US and within their own borders. In the province of Canada, the French Catholic majority in Canada East and the English Protestant majority in Canada West were constantly in conflict. The Atlantic colonies were looking to boost their economies after the US canceled the Reciprocity Treaty. The colonies of Vancouver Island and British Columbia were struggling financially after the end of the gold rush. In the province of Canada, it was becoming impossible for one government to keep control over two different cultural groups. The political system was becoming very unstable as important decisions resulted in tied votes, meaning the government had to be dissolved and replaced by a new government. Conservative leader John A. Macdonald and Liberal leader George Brown were bitter rivals who disagreed over French rights. Brown wanted to diminish French political power and assimilate the French. Macdonald wanted to protect the French culture. Both men agreed that Confederation would be a good solution to the problem, as Canada West and Canada East would get their own local governments, but would work together in the federal government on issues that both sides could agree on. And you are going to see the same image in your textbook. But what I want you to do when I finish speaking is to put the video on pause so that you can get a closer look at this picture and write down your response to this question. What details in this painting tell you that this meeting between Brown and Macdonald was significant? Please put the video on pause now. All right, let's continue. Many people in Canada East were opposed to Confederation, but their leader, Georges Etienne Cartier, believed the union would result in greater protection, more independence, and a better future for the French. Cartier was friendly with Macdonald and was likely inspired by Macdonald's defense of French Catholic rights in the province of Canada. Not surprisingly, Cartier, who you see in this image on the left, was not a fan of George Brown. It would therefore take a lot of work for Macdonald to get Cartier and Brown to cooperate with each other. In June of 1864, Macdonald, Brown, and Cartier formed a political alliance, which would come to be known as the Great Coalition. The three leaders began working to create a federal system for Canada, but they also wanted to expand their plan to include Rupert's Land and the Northwestern Territory. A legislative union would give more power to the central government for making laws and running the country. A federal union would give power to the central government and to provincial governments to run their own affairs. The nice thing about this time period is that we are beginning to get um, live image photography and not just paintings or illustrations. So look at this picture here. Other political leaders would join with the Great Coalition to unite the colonies, and together they would become known as the Fathers of Confederation. Officials in Britain were pleased with the plan. However, there were groups within British North America who were opposed to the idea. They felt that Confederation would cause more problems than it would solve. For example, the Atlantic colonies had resource-based economies. They benefited from strong trade with Britain and the US. The Atlantic colonies feared that joining with the Canadas would lead to the Canadas having too much influence over the other colonies. And you can see that by taking a look at the population in the various British North American colonies. Clearly, the populations of Canada East and Canada West were much, much larger than those of New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island. Newfoundland's economy was failing due to a decline in the cod and seal fishing industries. The government was using a quarter of its shrinking revenue for helping the poor. However, opponents of Confederation in Newfoundland claimed that the economic decline was temporary. They argued that Confederation would lead to a loss of independence and that there would be no economic benefits for Newfoundland. And Charles Fox Bennett was a merchant and politician who successfully fought attempts to bring Newfoundland into Confederation in the 1860s. The people of PEI were also concerned about the loss of independence. Leaders in both PEI and Nova Scotia claimed that their industries were still strong and they had stable governments. They argued that joining Confederation could also cause them to experience tension with Britain and the US, their main trading partners. New Brunswick was divided over the issue of Confederation. Britain was placing pressure on New Brunswick to consider uniting with the colonies, resulting in the election of a pro-Confederation premier in 1866. Edward Palmer, the premier of PEI on the left, and Joseph Howe, a former premier of Nova Scotia, both feared the possible negative consequences of uniting with Canada West and Canada East. The leaders of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and PEI realized that they had common concerns and that they all shared the fear of being dominated by the province of Canada. In September 1864, the leaders of these three colonies met to discuss uniting their colonies. This meeting took place at the Charlottetown Conference. Macdonald, Brown, and Cartier would become involved in the conference, and we will look more at the Charlottetown Conference in our next lesson. And you'll see an image similar to this one in your textbook. This is a sculpture in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, and it commemorates the former premiers of PEI and New Brunswick. Coincidentally, both were named John Hamilton Gray, but not related to each other. And it shows them meeting at the Charlottetown Conference. Both men would go on to become fathers of Confederation. By the 1860s, the fur trade was in serious decline. The bison were disappearing, and some First Nations were suffering from food shortages, famine, and diseases brought by the settlers. Supporters of Confederation felt it was crucial for Rupert's Land and the Northwestern Territory to be purchased from the HBC and included in the Union of the Colonies. There was growing concern that the HBC could sell these lands to the US, which would greatly threaten the future of the colonies, whether they united or not. Just looking at this map here, supporters of Confederation felt that the people of Canada East and the Atlantic colonies needed to be encouraged to join Confederation, but they did not see the need to do any more than purchase and take over Rupert's Land and the Northwestern Territory. Okay, when I'm done talking, you're going to put the video on pause to write down your response to this question. Why do you think they didn't consider the feelings of the people living on HBC-controlled lands? Please put the video on pause now. Okay, we're getting near the end. The end of the gold rush brought serious economic decline to the Pacific coast. In 1866, Britain forced Vancouver Island to merge with British Columbia to improve the economy. However, BC lacked a responsible government. With debt rising, BC considered joining Confederation. However, there was a huge distance between BC and the other colonies, and a number of people in BC supported joining the US. And looking on a map, it actually did make much more sense for BC to join the US. American markets were closer, and it would be easier to trade with the Americans. Okay, so we're going to wrap up today's lesson by discussing the following in tomorrow's class. Question number 1, what were the main arguments against joining Confederation? And 2, which colony had the most to gain from joining Confederation? Which colony had the most to lose? So, as always, you're going to put the video on pause so that you can write down your responses to these two questions. If you don't feel confident in your ability to answer one or both of these questions, it means you need to go back and watch this video again at least one more time, and then when you're ready, put the video on pause. I look forward to hearing everybody's responses to these questions, as well as the questions which were included earlier in this recording. But until we meet again, this concludes today's video.